on to probably a tool that you will find yourself using quite a lot if you are in the cyber industry. Whether you're red team or blue team, chances are you've heard of Nessus and you've used it. It's an insanely powerful, multifunctional security auditing, vulnerability scanning software. Nessus is amazing. The sheer amount of functionality you get in it is great. There are different level of versions, like there's an essential version which allows you to scan machines in your home network, and then there's a professional version which you will probably use in the industry, which allows you to scan, various networks. And that has a lot more functionality. That can allow you to do things like audit cloud infrastructures, upload switch configurations to check for best practices. There's so much to it. And yeah, it is tiered in different versions, but I've only got the essential version installed here, but there's still a lot we can look at. So I'm just going to log in. And yeah, Nessus is made by Tenable. You can download the package onto your machine and install it, and yeah, it's insanely powerful. But if we go to new scans quickly, you can see here all the different types of scans that you have. So you've got a standard host discovery, so you could just throw in a IP range, a CEDAR address, and it will go through and it will find out all the live hosts that are available within that range. Then you've got your basic network scan. This will scan for vulnerabilities on the host. It isn't too intrusive. You've got an advanced scan which allows you to scan hosts with more specific credentials, same with the dynamic scan. You've got a scan that will scan for malware on Windows systems and Unix systems. I believe you would need to submit credentials for this, but it will go in, it will look through the entire file system and look for anything that could be malicious. Mobile device scans, web application tests, where you would provide the credentials and the URL for the web application, and it will go through and try and find vulnerabilities. A credential patch audit, so again, things like on a Windows system, you would provide the credentials and it will go through and it will compare the Windows updates with what's known to be the latest available updates, just to ensure that you've got the updates installed. Remote and local checks for a Intel AMT security bypass CVs there. You've got Spectre and Meltdown. WannaCry will check for MS17010, I believe that's Eternal Blue, which is a vulnerability in SMB which allows you to perform remote code execution. There's a good box on Hack the Box about that, to be honest, and you can exploit it with Metasploit, dead easy. But yeah, it was using that the ransomware was allowed to spread. I believe it was actually programmed into the malware, into the ransomware, to look for other SMB shares and send itself off to those and spread to other networks. But yeah, you can see there's an incredible amount of different scans you can do. Print Nightmare, again, I think that's a RCE in the print spooler, right? Log4Shell, another big one which recently happened, which allows you to get shells because of the Apache logging software that was written in Java, and the way it sort of deserialized code in the logs. Basically, if you could write a bit of code that would get logged to the server would read it into the logs and execute it. Quite a scary vulnerability. I have found that in the wild before, which was terrifying. And you've got auditing of cloud infrastructures. So this is like Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. You can go in and you can just make sure that the cloud configuration is up to scratch, that it's meeting things like CIS benchmarks and things like that. Internal PCI network scan, again, to make sure your standards are up to scratch with the payment card industries. PCI is anything that takes credit cards and things like that. So yeah, if you are accepting credit cards, you need to make sure that your infrastructure complies with the PCI sort of compliance, and that's there. Mobile device configuration reviews, so again, that's your mobile device management software to make sure that's configured correctly and that people can't sort of bypass the MDM, and that it's not configured in a stupid way that's just going to wipe all of the drives overnight or all of the phones. Offline configuration audit, these are great as well. If you've got switch and firewall router configurations that you need reviewing, you can throw them into Nessus. Nessus will look through them, compare them to a benchmark of the best compliances out there, and it will point out, okay, you've got this, and this enabled in your firewall configuration, and it really shouldn't be, so review that and reconfigure it and report that to the client. But yeah, there's quite a lot going on, and what I've done is I've configured like an advanced scan and ran that. So if we go into my scans, and you can see there I ran this one today at 8:49 PM, and it's just against my Metasploitable 2 virtual machine. And as you can see, it breaks it down nicely. It tells you about like the CVSS scores, how long, like the time it took to run it. But if we click on vulnerabilities, you can see like all of the vulnerabilities that it found. So I mean, I love this type of software. You can just go in and see, okay, what's going on here then. So you look at this NFS expose share information disclosure. So we've got our Etsy exports configured to like pretty much mount entirety of root, and it was able to mount it without a password or a username, I believe, and then see the contents of it. Quite a significant vulnerability, because you could just pop a key into .ssh for the root, and there you go, you're on the box's root. But yeah, this is a great vulnerability scanner. It's really flexible in everything that it offers, and it's really easy to configure as well. You'd have to get a bit of practice with it, but there's loads of guides out there on how to best configure Nessus for a vulnerability scan. But you can see there's found a backdoor shell. Again, this is Metasploitable 2, so it is all intentionally vulnerable. But yeah, there's a lot that can be looked into. But if we just go up and go into the configuration of the scan that I run, you can see there I haven't given it a description, but I've given it a name, I've set the IP. You can set a schedule to tell it when you want to scan. You can send email notifications to yourself, and there you go, you can set discoveries. So you can set ping to on, but if you're scanning a Windows box, it's likely not going to respond to ICMP, so you want to turn ping off. Make sure it's doing like a SYN scan instead. And then you can specify ports. I've specified all ports 0 to 65,535, and you can see there it's doing a SYN scan, so it's communicating rather than doing a full TCP three-way handshake. Then it's checking for SSL, so this is good if you want to check things like SSL certificates to make sure that the TLS configuration on the host is set to use strong protocols, and that all sort of ciphers that sort of depreciated are no longer available. Assessment, and here you can set like the thoroughness of the scan. You can tell it to like show potential false alarms and things like that. You can specify whether you want to brute force it and throw in word lists and things like that. Web applications, you can tell it to scan web apps, and you can set things like the user agent and things like that. So if you want to sort of show your client that it's you scanning it, you could put your own sort of name in the user agent, so all traffic coming from you is easily identifiable for the blue team. Yeah, you can query information about the Windows domain. You can scan for malware, you can scan databases, and then you get to the report section, and you can override that. You can say whether you've got limited disk space or not, and then you can say report as much as possible. And then you've got sort of how to configure the display of the final report. How do you want to show the hosts? And in the advanced section, you can enable safe checks. You can scan like IPs in a random order. You can stop the scans against particular IP addresses if they stop responding. So if you accidentally knock over a box, you can tell it to stop scanning. But you can also like slow down the scans when it detects network congestion, which is particularly useful if you're going into an environment where the network is particularly flaky. And again, this does happen. Here you can specify credentials as well for Windows SSH, and this will like allow you to do like a proper credentialed audit of the host, because what you may find just listening on the services may only be a partial of the story. There may be a lot more on the host itself that's vulnerable, things that could allow you to perform privilege escalation, and you'll want to find those things like unquoted service paths and read, write and execute permissions on files that you shouldn't actually have access to, which you could then overwrite and use to elevate your privileges once you restart the service, right? And then you've got a bunch of plugins as well, and one thing I recommend doing is disabling that one right there. I actually learned that off a colleague recently, and I was mortified to find out that I hadn't been disabling it. Probably shouldn't say that on a video, but yeah, definitely check your plugins before you run your scan, because there could be some on there that are quite dangerous. But yeah, that's Nessus. There's a lot more to it than I'll cover here, but again, this is an essential tool for penetration testing. There are alternatives out there as well, really good alternatives like OpenVAS, but this is probably something you're more likely to come across early on in your career in the industry, and it's definitely something that you should have a knowledge of, if you're going in for an interview or a technical test, you know, they're likely to ask you about tools like OpenVAS and Nessus and how to configure them. But yeah, that's Nessus, great tool, I'd be lost without it.